My mother-in-law poured something strange into my drink when she thought I wasn't looking. "Special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law," she said with a smile. I thanked her and discreetly switched glasses with her husband, who always criticized my career. 45 minutes later. My name is Julian Mercer, 32 years old, independent photographer based in Asheville, North Carolina. I've built my business from nothing: weddings, wildlife, magazine spreads, the kind of work that pays the bills if you're good at it. And I am. But to my in-laws, especially Diane, what I do has never been enough. "How's the little photography hobby?" Gerald would ask at family dinners, not even trying to hide his disdain. He was an investment banker, the kind of man who measured success in square footage and stock options. Every Sunday dinner at their house was the same. Diane would fuss over her daughter while Gerald interrogated me about my finances. My wife Haley would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology for her parents. I'd been shooting a wildlife assignment in Montana all week, trudging through knee-deep snow to photograph bison for National Geographic. I was exhausted, but Haley insisted we couldn't miss her mother's birthday dinner. "Just a couple hours," she promised. I should have listened to that knot in my stomach when Diane cornered me in the kitchen, the way her eyes darted around before she handed me that drink, the slight tremor in her fingers as she said, "I made it special just for you." Something wasn't right. I just didn't know how wrong it was about to get. Haley and I met 6 years ago at an art exhibition where my work was featured. She was finishing her master's in environmental science, and I was just starting to make a name for myself. We connected instantly. She understood my need to capture the world through a lens, and I admired her passion for protecting it. Her parents were another story. From our first meeting, Gerald made it clear he had expected someone different for his daughter. Someone with a desk job, a retirement plan, a company car. Someone exactly like him. Diane was subtler. She'd praise my photos while asking when I planned to settle into something stable. She'd invite me to family functions, then introduce me as the photographer instead of her son-in-law. For years I tried to win them over. I'd bring expensive wine to dinner, show them published work, mention high-profile clients. Nothing changed their perception that I was just passing through their daughter's life, a phase she'd outgrow. Last Christmas, I overheard Diane on the phone. "Haley could have married Thomas, you know. Orthopedic surgeon, family money. But she chose the creative one." The way she paused before creative made it sound like a disease. Gerald was more direct. When Haley and I announced we were trying for a baby, he pulled me aside. "Children are expensive, son. Maybe think about real employment before bringing one into the world." I never told Haley these things. She loved her parents despite their flaws, and I didn't want to force her to choose sides. So I smiled, shook Gerald's hand firmly at every visit, complimented Diane's cooking, and kept my thoughts to myself. But there were signs I should have taken more seriously. The way Diane would ask Haley to help in the kitchen whenever I talked about a successful project. How she'd accidentally exclude me from family photos. The time Gerald suggested therapy for Haley's impulsive decisions, while looking directly at me. I ignored it all, thinking time would eventually bring acceptance. I was wrong. The Friday of Diane's birthday dinner, I returned from Montana with raw wind-burned cheeks and a memory card full of images that would pay our mortgage for 3 months. I was bone-tired but showered, put on a button-down shirt, and drove us to her parents' colonial-style home in the expensive part of town. Dinner started normally. Gerald bragged about a recent deal. Diane fussed over the table settings. Haley's brother Owen and his wife Vanessa made polite conversation. I nursed a beer and counted the minutes until we could leave. After the main course, Diane announced she'd made her famous sangria for dessert. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I offered to help carry glasses. That's when I saw it. She had 2 glasses separate from the others. As I entered, she quickly added something from a small vial into one of them. It wasn't a garnish or flavor. It was colorless, odorless, and she tucked the vial away the moment she heard my footsteps. "Oh, Julian, I've got this," she said too brightly. "This one's for you." Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law. My throat tightened. The glass had a barely perceptible film floating on top, catching the light. "Let me help you carry these," I said, taking both glasses she'd prepared. In the dining room, Gerald was checking his phone, barely looking up when I approached. "Sangria, sir." I placed the tampered glass in front of him instead of taking it myself. I watched him drink, making an excuse about preferring water with my dessert. 45 minutes later, Gerald was pale, sweating, and rushing to the bathroom. The violent sounds of his illness echoed through the house. Diane's face drained of color when she realized what had happened. Her eyes met mine across the table, and in that moment, I knew two things with absolute certainty. My mother-in-law had tried to poison me, and she knew that I knew. I didn't react, didn't confront her. Just ate my chocolate cake while Haley rushed to check on her father. In the chaos that followed, Gerald insisting it must have been food poisoning, Diane stammering about bad shellfish, I quietly pocketed the untouched glass meant for me. Something had shifted inside me. The anger I felt wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold, deliberate. I wasn't just going to let this go. But I wasn't going to fight their way either. I was going to make them face exactly who they were. The Monday after the dinner, I took the glass to Jason, a former client who ran a toxic psychology lab. "Personal or professional?" he asked when I explained what I needed. "Family matter," I replied. 3 days later he called. "Julian, there were benzodiazepines in that drink. Nothing lethal but enough to knock someone out for hours, maybe cause some memory loss. Where did you get this?" I thanked him and asked for a written report. I didn't answer his question. That night, I told Haley I wanted to skip Sunday dinner for a while. Said I needed to focus on an upcoming exhibition. She was disappointed but understood. I didn't tell her about the test results. Not yet. I needed more information first. Over the next 2 weeks I did some digging. Diane had a prescription for Xanax from 3 different doctors. She'd been doubling and tripling her doses for years. There were also rumors about her in town. Strange behavior at a neighbor's party. Accusations of stealing jewelry at her country club. Stories her family had worked hard to bury. I compiled everything and waited for my moment. It came when Haley mentioned her mother needed photos for a social media profile. "She specifically asked if you would take them," Haley said, surprised by the request. I agreed. The following Saturday, I arrived at their house alone, camera bag in one hand, a sealed envelope in the other. Diane was waiting, dressed expensively, makeup perfect. "Gerald is at the office," she explained. "Before we start," I said quietly, "I thought you might want to see this." I handed her the envelope containing the toxicology report along with printouts of her multiple prescriptions. Her hands trembled as she read. "This is absurd," she whispered. "I would never." "We both know what happened," I cut her off. "What I don't know is why." Her face hardened. "You're not good enough for my daughter. You never will be. A man should provide security, not pictures. And drugging your daughter's husband provides security." Kept my voice level. "It wasn't going to hurt you," she snapped. "Just make you sick. Make you miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been talking about for months. Show Haley that you're unreliable." I let that sink in. "Here's what happens next," I said finally. "You're going to tell Gerald what you did. Then you're both going to start treating me with respect. Not because you've suddenly changed your minds about me, but because the alternative is Haley finding out exactly who her parents are." Diane laughed, but it sounded hollow. "She'll never believe you over us." I picked up my camera bag. "Maybe not. But she'll believe the lab report and the prescription records, and the neighbors you've alienated. Are you willing to bet your relationship with your daughter on that?" I left without taking a single photo. That night, Diane called Haley in tears, claiming I'd behaved inappropriately during our session. Said I'd been hostile and threatening. When Haley confronted me, I couldn't hide the truth anymore. I showed her everything. The lab report, the prescriptions, even text messages from her mother that had become increasingly hostile over the years. My mother wouldn't do this, she kept saying, but her voice lacked conviction. The next day, she confronted her parents. I wasn't there, but when she returned home, her eyes were red from crying. My father says it's all a misunderstanding, she said quietly. That you're trying to drive a wedge between us because you're insecure about your career. I just nodded. I'd expected this. What do you think? Asked. She didn't answer. Just crawled into bed and turned away from me. I'd pushed back, but somehow I'd fallen deeper into their trap. Now I was the villain in their story. And they'd managed to plant doubt in the one person whose opinion mattered most to me. For 2 weeks, Haley barely spoke to me. She went to her parents' house alone, came back with red eyes and new doubt. I threw myself into work, spending long hours in my studio, waiting for the storm to pass. Then a package arrived for me. No return address, just my name scrawled across the top in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a note. You should see this. Vanessa, Owen's wife. The drive contained video files, home security footage from Gerald and Diane's house. The timestamps showed the night of the dinner. There was Diane in the kitchen, clearly adding something to a drink. There was me entering, taking the glasses. There was Gerald drinking from the tampered glass. But there was more. Footage from after we'd left. Diane screaming at Gerald, blaming him for drinking from the wrong glass. Gerald yelling back. This isn't the first time you've done something like this. I watched the footage 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. Not just confirmation of Diane's actions, but evidence of a pattern. Evidence that Gerald knew. The next file was from 2 days after the dinner. Diane and Gerald argued in their living room about me. He knows what you did, Gerald said. So what? Diane replied. It's his word against mine. Haley will never choose him over family. And if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised. Diane said coldly. Don't worry. I've already started talking to her about their marriage problems. Planting seeds. By the time I'm done, she'll be filing for divorce and thinking it was her idea. I shut my laptop, hands shaking. This wasn't just about me. This was a systematic effort to control Haley's life. To isolate her from anyone who didn't fit their vision. And they'd been doing it for years. Called Vanessa immediately. Why did you send this to me? Because they did the same thing to me when I married Owen, she said quietly. They tried to break us up for 2 years. Said I wasn't good enough. It almost worked. Why didn't you tell us? Owen doesn't know, she admitted. He worships his father. Believes everything he says. I've tried to tell him, but he thinks I'm paranoid. I just couldn't watch them do it to someone else. The next day, I received a text from Gerald. We should talk. Man to man. No wives. I met him at his country club. He was waiting in a private room, drinking bourbon. Julian, he began. Families are complicated. My wife, she can be difficult, protective, but she means well. Drugging someone means well. Yes. He waved his hand dismissively. A misunderstanding. Diane takes medication for anxiety. She probably mixed up the glasses. I have the security footage, Gerald. His face changed instantly, hardening into something cold and calculating. What do you want? Money. Is that what this is about? I always knew you married Haley for financial reasons. I want you both to leave us alone, I said simply. Stop trying to convince Haley I'm not good enough. Stop interfering in our marriage. Gerald leaned forward. You think this is the first time we've dealt with someone like you? People who want to take advantage of our family. He laughed. Haley will come home where she belongs. She always does. Ask her about Thomas. Ask her about the fiancé before you. Felt cold. What are you talking about? Haley was engaged before she met you. Nice guy. Doctor. We didn't like his background. Took us 6 months to convince her he was wrong for her. She broke it off. Came home crying to Daddy. He smiled. History repeats, son. On the drive home, I called Haley's college roommate, Bethany. Ask her about Thomas. Oh God, she said. That was awful. He was perfect for her. But her parents, they convinced her he was cheating, planted evidence. He tried to tell her the truth, but by then, she didn't trust him anymore. The pattern was clear now. This wasn't just about me. It was about control. Complete control over their daughter's life. And they'd done it before. Continued in next message. Let me know if you'd like the continuation now or want it in a downloadable format. Choose our own partners, our own path. Diane started crying. Not from remorse but from the realization that she was losing control. Gerald just looked stunned, as if he couldn't comprehend that his children were defying him. As we prepared to leave, I handed Gerald a USB drive. This contains everything. The footage, the emails, the testimonies. It's yours to keep. What's that supposed to mean? He asked suspiciously. It means that I'm not going to ruin your reputation by sharing this with anyone else. That would hurt Haley, and I would never do that. Pause. But if you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever try to manipulate Haley or speak against me, copies will go to every member of your country club, your business partners, and your precious social circle. For the first time since I'd met him, Gerald looked at me with something resembling respect. I underestimated you. Yes, I said simply. You did. 6 months passed. Haley and Owen began therapy to work through the damage their parents had caused. Diane and Gerald kept their distance, sending occasional texts but respecting the boundaries we'd established. Then, over the holidays, they invited us all to dinner. A fresh start, the invitation read. Haley wanted to go. They're still my parents, she said, and they're trying. I agreed, but I wasn't naive enough to believe they'd changed. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. Diane had prepared a feast. Gerald was charming, asking about my latest projects with what appeared to be genuine interest. After dinner, Gerald invited me into his study. I have a proposition for you, he said, pouring me a scotch. I've been thinking about your career. Photography is... well, it's been good to you. But have you considered diversifying? I could bring you into my firm. Junior partner track. The salary would be substantial. I took the glass but didn't drink. Why would you do that? Your family, he said smoothly. And I respect how you handled the unpleasantness. You protected my daughter while standing your ground. That's what a real man does. I set the glass down untouched. I appreciate the offer, but no. His smile tightened. Julian, be reasonable. This is an olive branch. A way for us to move forward. No, I repeated. It's another attempt at control. You can't buy me, Gerald. And you can't stand the fact that Haley loves me exactly as I am. Don't be a fool, he hissed, dropping the facade. Everyone has a price. I stood up. That's where you're wrong. And that's why you'll never understand your daughter. I walked back to the dining room, where Diane was showing Haley photo albums. Look at these, she was saying. You were so happy when you lived at home. Haley caught my eye across the room. She could see from my expression that something had happened. I gave a slight nod and she stood up. Mom, Dad, she announced clearly. I have something to tell you. Everyone turned to look at her. We're having a baby. Julian and I. I'm 3 months pregnant. The shock on their faces was genuine. Diane recovered first, rushing to embrace her daughter with tears in her eyes. Gerald approached more slowly, glancing between Haley and me. Congratulations, he said stiffly. Thank you, I replied, then lowering my voice so only he could hear. This child will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that. His face hardened, but he nodded once. He understood the message. As we drove home that night, Haley squeezed my hand. They'll never change, will they? No, I said honestly. But they'll have to accept that we have. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Gerald's attorney. Inside was a deed to a house, our house which we'd been renting, and legal documents establishing a trust fund for our unborn child. There was no note, no conditions, no strings. Just the transfer of assets, clean and irrevocable. It wasn't an apology. Gerald wasn't capable of that. But it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the only one he could give, that we had won. Our daughter was born in summer. We named her Eliza, after my grandmother. When Diane and Gerald came to the hospital, they brought gifts but maintained a respectful distance. They cooed over the baby, took photos, and left without trying to give us parenting advice or financial lectures. Months passed. Our relationship with them settled into something resembling normalcy. They never apologized for what they'd done, but they stopped trying to control Haley's life or undermine my career. One evening, as I was editing photos in my studio, Haley came in carrying Eliza. "My mother called," she said. "She wants us to come for Christmas." I looked up from my computer. "What do you want to do?" "I think we should go," she replied. "But with conditions. We stay at a hotel, not their house. We leave when we want to leave. No unsupervised time with Eliza." He nodded. "Sounds reasonable." She sat down beside me, bouncing the baby gently. "You know," she began, her voice quiet, thoughtful, as if she were speaking more to herself than to me. "For the longest time, I believed success was about doing everything right in their eyes. Making mom and dad proud. Earning their approval, checking all the boxes they thought mattered. Good grades, a steady job, the kind of life that looks neat and impressive from the outside." She paused, her gaze drifting out the window for a moment before settling on our daughter, who sat cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in her coloring. A faint smile touched her lips, but there was something weighty in her eyes. Years of trying, of hoping, of falling short in ways no one else could see. "And now," she said softly, lifting her eyes to meet mine, "now I see it differently. Success isn't about approval anymore. It's about the choices I can live with, the ones I want to make. It's about standing up for what I believe in, even when it's hard. About showing up for the people I love, not because it looks good, but because it matters." Her words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. And then, like a quiet echo of fate, I remembered the envelope. It had arrived 2 weeks before Christmas. Thick, important looking, with Gerald's firm logo stamped in the corner. I'd opened it cautiously, unsure what to expect. Inside was a glossy brochure. The annual report from his company. But what caught me off guard wasn't the corporate sheen. It was what was inside. Page after page of my photographs. Sunlit landscapes, candid portraits, striking shots of old architecture. My work. My vision. Not his. The images stared back at me from that polished paper. Each one a quiet rebellion. I had created them on my own terms, with no oversight, no manipulation, no compromises. And now, there they were. Featured in his report, admired, celebrated. It was the strangest kind of victory. Tucked inside the brochure was a single sheet of heavyweight paper. The handwriting unmistakably his, neat, deliberate, and characteristically brief. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy." That was it. No apology. No elaborate explanation. Just a few spare words that somehow said far more than they appeared to on the surface. It wasn't forgiveness. Not really. And it certainly wasn't a sweeping reconciliation. But it was something. A quiet gesture that carried the weight of something harder to define. Maybe respect, maybe reluctant admiration. Or perhaps it was simply his way of acknowledging what he could never say aloud. That I had made it. That I had succeeded, not by following his rules, but by breaking away from them. On my own terms. I sat with that note for a long time, turning it over in my hands like it might reveal more if I held it just the right way. The photographs in that brochure were a portfolio of everything I had worked for, struggled through, and claimed as mine. No compromises, no second-guessing, no need for validation. Just the truth captured frame by frame. I didn't call him. I didn't write back. There was no need. We both knew this wasn't about gratitude. It wasn't about mending old wounds or reopening closed doors. This was about drawing a line, quiet, firm, unspoken, between the past and the present. About recognizing the space we now occupied in each other's lives, defined more by absence than presence. And yet, there was a strange comfort in that silence. A mutual understanding. A truce of sorts. That spring, with winter finally loosening its grip on the mountains, I opened the doors to something I'd dreamed of for years. My own gallery, right in the heart of downtown Asheville. The grand opening was more than just an event. It was a turning point. Declaration. Haley stood beside me, her arm gently around my waist. Eliza perched on her hip in a polka-dot dress that made her look like a tiny beam of sunlight. My parents had flown in from Oregon for the occasion. My mother teary-eyed the moment she stepped inside. My father quietly proud, hands folded behind his back as he studied the walls. Friends came, clients I hadn't seen in years. Strangers who'd followed my work online and wanted to see it up close. The space buzzed with voices and laughter, glasses clinking, children darting between legs. The photographs, framed, curated, illuminated, lined the gallery walls like windows into memory. Sweeping landscapes, fleeting expressions, stolen moments that told stories even I was still learning to understand. I looked around and felt something rise in my chest. Not relief, not triumph. Something quieter, deeper. Not a place, but a sense of being exactly where I was meant to be. Gerald and Diane came too. I hadn't been sure they would. Hadn't invited them exactly, but hadn't excluded them either. Word travels fast in small circles, especially when success starts to echo. They arrived late, near the end of the evening, slipping in quietly just as the crowd began to thin. Gerald wore a dark blazer, more formal than the rest, his posture rigid as ever. Diane followed beside him, her heels clicking softly against the polished floorboards, eyes darting from one framed photo to the next like she was bracing for something. Judgment, maybe, or some trace of the past she hadn't quite come to terms with. They didn't stay long. For a brief moment, Diane reached out and asked to hold Eliza. Haley hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but gave a small nod. I watched closely as Diane cradled our daughter, her movements careful, tentative, like someone holding something fragile they hadn't expected to be trusted with. Eliza blinked at her, unfazed, a small yawn escaping her lips before she turned and buried her face against Haley's shoulder. Diane handed her back almost immediately, murmuring something polite but inaudible. Gerald walked the room slowly, his eyes scanning each photograph with a quiet intensity. When he reached me, he extended his hand. His grip was firm, the kind of handshake he used to give when he wanted to assert dominance. But this time it felt different, measured, respectful. He nodded once, gesturing vaguely toward the wall of images. "Strong work," he said simply. And then, with no unsolicited advice, no thinly veiled critiques, no half-hearted offers to help guide the next phase, he turned and walked out beside Diane. No drama, no fanfare, just the sound of the gallery door closing behind them. Later, as Haley and I locked up, flicking off the lights, gathering empty glasses, brushing away stray cupcake crumbs from the reception table, she leaned her head against my shoulder and asked softly, "Do you think they've changed?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about it as I looked around at the space we had built, the walls lined with my photographs, the soft hum of the heater, the lingering warmth of the night's joy still clinging to the room. "No," I said finally, my voice low, thoughtful. "I don't think they've changed. But I think they've accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes that's enough." Much later, after Eliza was tucked safely in her crib, after the last dish had been washed and the gallery keys rested on the hallway hook, Haley and I sat together on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cool mountain air. The night stretched out around us, clear and deep, the stars scattered across the sky like a promise. I watched the way the starlight touched the ridgelines in the distance, soft and silver, and in that stillness, I realized something I'd never been able to say out loud, not even to myself. Success wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't about beating their expectations or forcing recognition. It was about becoming someone I could live with. Someone who chose love over approval, courage over comfort, truth over control. And in that quiet moment, with Haley beside me and our daughter dreaming upstairs, I knew I had become that person. I hadn't won by mastering their rules or learning how to play their game better than they did. No, I'd won by stepping off the board entirely, by refusing to let their expectations define the shape of my life. Gerald and Diane had built a world around strategy, control, and the illusion of perfection. In that world, love was transactional, worth was conditional, and success was something you measured in accolades and influence. But I'd chosen something else, something quieter, slower, more difficult to explain, but infinitely more real. I'd stood my ground when it would have been easier to fold. I'd walked away from the comforts they dangled like bait. I protected what mattered most. My integrity, my voice, the people I loved. And in the process, I'd built a life that was undeniably mine. Not curated for their approval, not trimmed to fit their narrative, but shaped by a different compass. One that pointed toward truth, toward purpose, toward freedom. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic showdowns. Just years of quiet persistence. Of saying no when it counted. Of showing up every single day, even when no one was watching. I didn't get here with schemes or manipulation or carefully calculated moves. I got here with honesty. With a camera slung over my shoulder, light in my hands, and the determination to tell stories that mattered, even if they never saw them. And in the end, that was the sweetest, most unexpected kind of victory. Not vengeance, not vindication. Just peace. A life I didn't have to justify. A love that didn't ask to be earned. A family that didn't fit their mold but felt whole in a way they might never understand. That was the most satisfying revenge of all. Not winning their game, but proving I didn't need to play it. Living well, fully and freely. On my own terms, with the family I chose and the life I created beside me. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.